Hello, 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 and welcome to the bonus episode of today's FYI on the Grand Canyon. If you've been there, then you know that this place is absolutely awe-inspiring. It will take your breath away. Dun, 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 dun. Take your breath away. Hey, it's an easy way to remember breathtaking. And I was due for a song. Me tocaba una canción. Let's take a look at some of the fauna and wildlife at the Grand Canyon. There are approximately 1,737 known species of vascular plants. And careful with that word, species. Species are different kinds of animals, and spices are things you'll find in your kitchen. I mix those words up in Spanish. Then you've got 167 species of fungi. Fungi? Tío divertido? What? No, fungus. Well, the plural is fungi. We're talking about mushrooms here. There are also 64 different species of moss, including Cape moss. All right, I'll stop. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Because the park spans so many different sea levels, you'll find all kinds of different fauna depending on what level you're at. It'll look like a totally different park. So the Grand Canyon can be so many different parks depending on what part you're exploring. I mean, just think of the elevation change, 2,400 meters. You're going to get different plants and animals at the bottom than you're going to get at the top. We already talked about the wide range of temperatures there are on the same day at the same time. So I guess these are called microclimates. I'm not a meteorologist, obviously, but I find this stuff fascinating. There are also a dozen endemic plants, and I didn't know what that meant, but that means plants that are only known within the park. Then there are 90 mammal species, and a mammal, that's us, mamíferos. 18 of those mammals are rodents, and rodents, I think you say roedores. 22 are bats. So there are 22 different types of bats at the Grand Canyon. That's batty. Batty means crazy. Hey, it might have been a bad joke, but hopefully you learned that adjective. All right, now I'm going to ask you guys, how many different species of birds do you think there are in the Grand Canyon? Answer using a full sentence. This way we're practicing there are, and we're practicing the pronunciation of species. There are 250 species of birds, 25 types of reptiles, which are my least favorite, by the way, and 5 species of amphibians. And here's a little trivia question for you. What do you think the most dangerous animal in the canyon is? I know what you're thinking. You're thinking rattlesnakes or coyotes. No, but the canyon is home to pink snakes. The Grand Canyon pink rattlesnake is only found in the Grand Canyon, and it is one of the 6 rattlesnake species that live within the park. And the reason the snakes are pink is because they love Barbie. No, I'm just kidding. It's because they blend in with the rocks around them. They're almost like chameleons. But no, it's not pink snakes. It's not coyotes. It's not even the wolf. It's the rock squirrel. And what they say is that visitors are most often bitten by this humble little squirrel. And be careful with that word. A squirrel es una ardilla gris. It's a gray one. A chipmunk is the one with stripes, like Alvin, Simon, and Theodore. So those little buggers, those little rock squirrels, I'd be watching out for snakes the whole time. I would never imagine a squirrel biting me. Oh, and there's a verb. To squirrel away means to hide or to save. Well, that's what squirrels do. They put away or save acorns for the winter. There are also Gila monsters and bighorn sheep and everything you can imagine under the sun. The canyon is also full of fossils. Now, how many of those do you think are from dinosaurs? Did you say zero, zilch, nada? That's right, none. Supposedly, it's because the canyon layers, not layers, I've heard people mispronounce this word, the canyon layers were formed long before dinosaurs walked the earth. However, they have found fossils of ancient marine animals, some that date back to 1.2 billion years ago. That's a number I can't even fathom. Have you ever heard of life zones? Well, here's something I didn't know about. As I said, I always like to learn something in every episode as well. And on this planet, there are 7 life zones. Well, 5 of those 7 life zones can be found in the Grand Canyon. You have the Lower Sonoran, the Upper Sonoran, Transition, Canadian, and Hudsonian. This is the equivalent of traveling from Mexico to Canada, and that's due to the differences in elevation, the variations in climate, and many other factors. But I didn't know about those life zones. And as with everything, there's a dark side, my amigos. In 1956, the Grand Canyon was the site of the deadliest commercial aviation disaster in history at that time. It was the morning of June 30th, 1956. A TWA Lockheed Super Constellation, or a Connie as they call it, and a United Airlines Douglas DC-7 departed Los Angeles International Airport within 3 minutes of one another on eastbound transcontinental flights. And eastbound means moving east. If you are westbound, you are moving west. You'll see it in the subway in New York City. This is a Bronx-bound A train. That means con rumbo a. And approximately 90 minutes into the flight, the 2 propeller-driven airliners collided above the canyon while both were flying in unmonitored airspace. The wreckage of both planes fell into the eastern portion of the canyon. The disaster killed all 128 passengers and crew members on board both planes. The accident also led to the institution of high-altitude airways, these highways in the sky, and also to direct radar observation of aircraft by en route ground controllers. This is now known as positive control. This also led to the creation of the FAA. This is the board that regulates the aviation industry in the United States. Unfortunately, it wasn't the only mid-air collision over the Grand Canyon. There was another one on June 18th, 1986. It was a twin otter, a plane, which collided with a Bell 206 helicopter. All 25 passengers and crew on board were killed. So the place does not escape tragedy. But think about it. It's nature. It's nature at its biggest and boldest. And if you're going to fight man versus nature, we already know who's going to win that battle. How many stories have we heard about people who have had to be rescued because they went hiking and it got too cold, or it got too late, or they got lost, or they didn't bring enough food? So we're going to look at some tips a little bit later on so you avoid any of those mistakes. You don't want to be one of those statistics or one of those Wikipedia pages. Obviously, airplane deaths are not the only deaths that occur at the Grand Canyon. Between the mid-1800s and 2015, there have been around 770 deaths. Some of them were falls, others were environmental causes such as heat stroke or cardiac arrest, dehydration, hypothermia, and don't forget about flash floods. Also, many drowned in the Colorado River. Some even died in freak accidents. and freak accidents means unexpected, like a rock slide or something like that, or a lightning strike. And around 20 people were victims of homicides. Imagine that. You're going to the Grand Canyon to have a nice week with your family in nature, and somebody shoots you? Hey, it could happen. It happened to 23 different people. Speaking of death, the Hopi tribe considers the Grand Canyon a gateway to the afterlife. That's right, the tribe has always placed great spiritual significance on the site. They believe that when you die, a person passes westward through what they call a place of emergence, and this is located upstream from the confluence of the Colorado and Little Colorado rivers, which are both in the canyon. And they believe people pass through this gateway on their journey to the afterlife. Hey, it looks like an amazing gateway if you ask me. I know we always talk about St. Peter and the gates of heaven, the pearly gates, but imagine if heaven looked like the Grand Canyon. Wow. And the Hopi tribe is just one of the 5 tribes who call the Grand Canyon home. You have the Hopi, the Navajo, the Havasupai, the Paiute, and the Hualapai. And there's even a little town down inside the canyon. The population is 208 people. It's called Supai Village, and it is the most remote community in the continental U.S. Earlier, we talked about caves as well. So I imagine if you're into spelunking, then this is the place for you. Well, no, not really. And I'll explain why. There are an estimated 1,000 caves within the canyon. Great, so what's the problem? Well, only 335 of those have been recorded, and only one of those is open to the public. So if spelunking is your thing, maybe the Grand Canyon isn't your national park. But it must be really frustrating to be there and that be your thing, and then you realize there are caves everywhere, but I just can't get to them. Also, I told you the Grand Canyon is probably the most famous canyon in the world, but it's not the world's deepest canyon. And depending on how the depth of the gorge is measured, it actually comes behind the Cotahuasi Canyon in Peru and the Kali Kandaki Gorge in Nepal. Hey, why has Nepal always got the tallest and deepest things? By the way, if you haven't listened to the episode on Mount Everest, give it a listen. Another funny story here. In 1909, the canyon was the site of a giant hoax. Do you remember this word? A hoax is a big scam when you deceive a lot of people at the same time. And what happened was the Arizona Gazette, which was a local newspaper, reported that archaeologists had discovered traces of an ancient Tibetan or Egyptian, they weren't sure, Tibetan or Egyptian civilization in an underground tunnel in the canyon. The Smithsonian Institute looked into this, and they denied the entire story. They claimed that they had no knowledge of these archaeologists. But to this day, there are conspiracy theories out there that say that there was an ancient civilization that lived there, and now the government has covered it up. Hey, I don't know what to believe, but I think the Grand Canyon is interesting enough without the conspiracy theories. And aside from the thriving tourism and amazing adventure industry, there's another thriving business in the park as well. I'm talking about Kolb Studio. Kolb Studio, which in 1906 was set up by brothers Ellsworth and Emery Kolb. And they decided to set up a photo studio when they realized that a photography business might be a good opportunity in that area, that they could make a killing. And what they did is they would take pictures of the tourists as they were departing to explore the Grand Canyon, as they embarked on their journey to the bottom. and they took these really amazing pictures of people with the Grand Canyon as a backdrop as they were sitting on a mule. And since they knew that these people were going to be a while, they were going to be exploring the canyon, well, they would take those reels back to their studio and develop the film. And then they would make prints of it. And when the tourists were coming back from their adventure through the canyon, they saw these awesome pictures of themselves. And of course, many people said, "How much? Yes, I'll take 2. And to this day, you can still get your picture taken by Kolb Studio. I know selfies have become more popular, but I think it's more about the nostalgia and supporting a business that was started by 2 brothers in 1906 because they saw an opportunity. They captured people's memories and they made a quick buck. As I told you guys, I've been to the Grand Canyon and there are no words to express how I felt. When I was sitting there on the edge, looking at it, it just seemed endless. It gives you the same feeling you feel when you look into space and you look up at the sky. It's just vast. It makes you feel like the possibilities are endless in life. It's inspirational. And so many people, artists, photographers alike, have been inspired by this amazing American treasure. But I will never forget that moment. It is frozen in my brain. When I got out of the car, I walked over to the edge and I sat there on the edge of the Grand Canyon. Here are some top tips, and I got these right from the American National Park Service. Number 1, know before you go. That means do your research, do your homework. As we said before, especially if you're going to the North Rim, there are temporary road closures. So make sure you know before you go. Number 2, know where you're going to spend the night. Don't rough it. No lo dejas a la aventura. Reserve a place to stay. There are many campgrounds with all the facilities of home. Also, number 3, pack your patience. You can expect crowds and traffic. You aren't the only one who wants to see the Grand Canyon. So be patient. Take a deep breath. Take in the beautiful views. Okay, I added that last part. Number 4, drive responsibly. It's hard to park, especially if you have an RV. So respect all the signs on the road. You wouldn't want to run over a deer or a child, even worse. Number 5, free South Rim shuttle bus routes are in operation. So if you feel like taking a bus, you can take the bus and leave the car behind. Number 6, pets are not allowed below the canyon rim. So they are allowed in the park, but they cannot go down into the canyon. Number 7, keep wildlife wild. Never approach or feed squirrels, deer, elk, or bison. Number 8, backcountry permits are required for all overnight trips into the Grand Canyon. And as we said before, get them in advance. Number 9, summer hikers should be prepared for severe heat and elevation changes. And number 10, which I think is a bit of common sense, protect yourself and others. To be honest, I can't wait to return, but I'll wait till my daughter's a little bit older and she can appreciate it. But that's definitely a pending trip we have. Not just the Grand Canyon, but many national parks in the United States. And by the way, if you haven't listened to the episode on national parks, give it a listen. I don't want to beat around the bush, but now it's time to take a look at some idiomatic expressions. Oops, there's the first one. To beat around the bush. It means to not go to the point. You say something similar in Spanish. Andar por las ramas. And don't worry if you're on edge. And be careful, because that's different than being on the edge. So if you're on the edge, you're like me at the Grand Canyon. Estás en el borde. But if you're on edge without the article, it means you're nervous. You can also say he's edgy. Also, an edge is an advantage. If you learn English with me, you will have a competitive edge. You'll know all these cool idiomatic expressions. And many of you already know the word edge. I'm just giving you some other uses, especially if you're U2 fans. Isn't the guitarist or the bassist named The Edge? But I guess that's water under the bridge. What? Well, it's very similar to your expression in Spanish, agua pasada. We say water under the bridge, agua que ha pasado por debajo del puente. So just go with the flow. Don't go against the grain. Go with the flow, which is déjate llevar. Has to do with rivers, right? The flow of a river. And if you don't like that, well then, cry me a river, cry me a river. That means go ahead, cry all you want, I don't care. When you tell somebody, cry me a river, you're telling them, I have zero pity for you. But don't send them up the river. To send somebody up the river is to send them to prison. I imagine it comes from New York City. Most of the prisons are up the Hudson River. So if they send you up the river, they're sending you to prison. But just be careful. You don't want to be up Schitt's Creek. And a creek is a little river, a creek or a brook. And there's actually a TV show called Schitt's Creek. Well, the expression is, I'm up Schitt's Creek. That means I'm in a really bad situation. If we want to add emphasis, we say, I'm up Schitt's Creek without a paddle. Sin remo. I guess it's another way of saying you're in deep water. Estás en muchos líos. En problemas gordos. Maybe it's because you're a late bloomer. A late bloomer? Well, to bloom, that's what flowers and plants do. But a late bloomer is somebody who catches on to something a little bit late. So everybody got on social media. Not me. I was a late bloomer. I joined many years later. I finally caved in. And there's another idiomatic expression. To cave in, to say, okay, all right, we'll do it. I think it's ceder in Spanish. But before I take a hike, and to take a hike is hacer senderismo o irse. In fact, if you tell somebody, take a hike, you're telling them get lost. But before I take a hike, I need to look at a few other expressions. I want to nip them in the bud. And to nip something in the bud comes from gardening. If you remember, we probably looked at that one in the gardening episode. I think you say cortar por la raíz. Well, hey, you can use that expression next time you're in my neck of the woods. My neck of the woods means my area. But you'll need many other expressions to be out of the woods. What? Well, if you're out of the woods, it means you're clear. No more problems. It's smooth sailing from here. Wow, that was really difficult, but now we're out of the woods. Another one that has to do with woods and forests is you can't see the forest for the trees. And this means we have to look at the big picture. We need perspective. And with that one, we will wrap today's episodes of FYI. I hope you guys learned a lot. I hope I took you there, at least in your mind. And I hope you'll join us in next week's episodes of FYI.